One of the most important aspects of fly fishing is being able to connect all of the various materials that we use together. From the backing through the fly line and the leader, we're talking about a lot of different types of materials, and these require a considerable amount of knot skills to join them so that you can fish with confidence. You can put a lot of pressure on fish and know that your system isn't going to break down. The knots and rigs I'm going to show you here are ones I've been using for quite a few years and that I believe I've perfected. By using this connection system, I fish with complete confidence, regardless of what I've hooked up. The first part of this sequence of rigging your fly reel that I want to show you is putting on the backing. Now, most people these days prefer to use Spectra braid, this GSP braid. Beautiful stuff as fly reel backing, very fine, strong, but it does have one particular characteristic, and that is that it's quite slippery. Therefore, knotting it has to be done in a particular way. Now, to connect the GSP backing to the reel, I always take the spool off the reel, and I'll show you why. Just pop this spool off. Get a bit of backing to work with here. Take it around the reel Arbour 3 times. Now, it's much easier to pop the spool off any reel. Just pop the spool off, take it around 3 times. It's much easier to do that than it is to try and thread it through the reel and go round and round. Now, to secure this braid to the reel, I'll tie a 12-turn uni knot. And the reason I use a uni knot is that it slides. So I can tie this out here on the main part of the line using 12 turns because this material is so slippery. 5 turns won't hold it. When I pull it up tight, 5-turn uni knot will slip and pop. 12 turns will hold it securely. Okay, pull it down tight. Pull that uni knot up slowly. Now, at this stage, don't trim the tag because we're going to need the tag to complete the tightening. Slide the uni knot down against the Arbour. Now, if I hold the reel like so, you can see here that when I pull, this slides down until it's secure and hard against the Arbour. Don't worry about the little bit of yellow dust that comes off. In this case, I'm using a Finn Spectra braid. Wonderful stuff for backing. Don't worry about the little bit of colouring that comes off. That's just the dye on the outside of the backing. Give the tag a second tightening. So you've tightened that knot down. Pull it down hard against the Arbour again. By pulling against the rotation, you're sliding that knot down and then trim the tag off. Now, Spectra is tough stuff. You do want a good pair of scissors to do this. Get it right in there, trim it away. There it is. Now that will not rotate around the reel. Imagine how embarrassing it would be to put on your backing so loosely that when you hooked a fish, the whole lot spun against the reel. Now, by doing it this way, this simply will not happen. I cannot rotate that backing around that Arbour, and that's what we want. There's a couple of really important points to using GSP line as backing on fly reels. One is that it has to be packed very, very tight. This line is very fine, and under pressure, if it's not packed tight, it will bury into itself. It'll bury in under the wraps beneath it. Okay, so you've got to pack it very tight. Also, by packing it very tight, it means you can get the maximum amount of backing on the reel. If you don't pack it tight, another thing that can happen, you hook a big fish, You wind it back on under pressure when you're fighting that fish, and you find that your backing capacity has shrunk by 100 metres or so. Now you don't want that to happen. You want to fill the spool up fully right from the beginning. You notice I've got a finger stall on here. Spectra also can cut you. It's quite abrasive, and I use a finger stall or a glove to keep the line spread evenly on the spool, spread back and forth so it doesn't build up on one side or in the middle. And by using my finger like so, just swinging it back and forth, I'm in full control of how that line is spread on the spool. It's also handy to mount the reel onto a rod, so you can run the line up through one of the guides and hold the rod out like this, but I've sort of developed this technique over the years, tucking it in here and just working it back and forth and packing it nice and tight. Now the reason I've got this spool on the ground and a piece of dowel through it is that I can control the pressure with my feet. This is just a basic home rig up. You can set up all sorts of line winders. You can put this backing onto say a game fishing reel and then wind it off the game fishing reel onto the fly reel. But this is just basically straight off the spool onto the reel. Now with my feet I can apply pressure to the dowel, and that puts pressure on the line, and it means that I've packed it down really, really tight on the reel, and when it's full, there's been no error in the system. There's no soft backing on here. I've got the maximum amount of backing I can fit onto this reel, and it's not going to tangle or rotate on the spool when I'm fighting a fish. Get it right the first time, and it'll last like that for many, many years. Because this GSP backing is so fine, I don't like to use it as a direct connection to the back end of the fly line for your loop-to-loop connection. I prefer to put a loop of braided monofilament onto the end of this GSP backing, which gives us a loop-to-loop connection that is easy to undo. If you use this GSP braid on a loop-to-loop connection, you get a big fish, it pulls tight, it will really embed itself deep into the back end of the fly line, and it makes getting it apart quite difficult. Now what I'm going to show you now is a braided loop made from braided monofilament going onto the GSP backing, which gives us a fantastic loop-to-loop connection system. The material I use is a hollow braided monofilament. Now the first thing I have to do is to make a loop in the end of this braid. Now this braid is hollow. I'll use a large tapestry needle. By squashing the end down flat, I can thread this. This is 35-pound braid I'm using here. 35-pound hollow braid, braided monofilament. I'm going to take this tag end back down inside itself, like so. Okay, I'm threading the needle, see through there, threading the needle down inside, turn it around. It's funny how you work one way but not the other. Take that tag end of that braid, I loop my finger through here just to keep it in place, take the tag end of that braid back down inside the braid, exit the needle, pull the tag out. Now I can adjust the size of this loop here by pulling that tag back down through. Now I like to leave a loop that is big enough to pass the reel through. Makes changing fly lines very easy. So now you can see where I've taken this tag back down inside itself. There it is there. There's where the tag ends, just there. I'm going to cut off about 30 centimetres of this braid here, which gives me a loose braided loop. Now, the next part of this is to take the GSP backing up the inside of it. So there's the braided loop that I prepared with an end here of around 30 centimetres or 12 inches. Now, what I have here is a long loop of single strand fishing wire. It's folded, it's doubled over and at the end there. Now, I want to insert that into this hollow braid above where the tag ends. Very important to do it above where the tag ends. I'm going to push it right down through the braid, out the other end, like so, just threading it up through it. Keep it going, keep it going. Now make sure this piece of wire is long enough. The last thing you want is this end here disappearing inside the braid. But what we do want is the wire to exit from the end there. Okay. Now open that loop of wire up, like so. Take the GSP backing, the end of the GSP backing, through that loop. And pull it through, giving yourself a fair bit of line to work with. Okay, so I've worked a long length here. This is around 60 centimeters long. And with that piece of wire, pull that backing right up through the hollow braid like so. So that the loop exits there. And once you've removed that piece of wire that you've used to pull the GSP braid through, you're left with a loop coming out the side of the braided monofilament. Now, take the loop and the braided monofilament and pass it through the loop of GSP braid 5 times. Put your loop of hollow braided monofilament over a hook. Now every rigging bench should have a hook. This is obviously not a connection that you're going to make when you're out at sea. I'll show you later some emergency connections if you ever happen to have your backing broken. But for now, this is something that you would do at home on your rigging bench, and it is a connection that will last for many years. So put the loop of your braided monofilament over a hook. Now, this is the magical bit. By pulling on both strands of the GSP coming out of the end of the braid here, I'm going to pull that GSP loop down like a cat's paw. You'll see it sliding down there beautifully. Now it tightens up onto 4 strands of braided monofilament. If I slide down the braid here and pull the GSP, you'll see it pull down onto those 4 strands of monofilament. That is very, very strong. It will not slip, it will not break, it will not let you down. The next thing is to finish it off. Take the tag, the end of the GSP, pull any slack out of the system here, take the tag at the end of the GSP and do a half hitch, securing down the fraying end of the braided monofilament. Just 1 half hitch. Pull it up tight. That should hold that in place. Now, do a series of half hitches, single half hitches, sliding them in under your fingers. Like so. Half a dozen of them. Now to finish this off securely, I'm going to use an old sailing method for finishing off whippings and bindings. It's actually called fiping, but these days it's known as the risotto finish, and it works like this. It's a half hitch, but you take it around 5 times. Lay the tag back along the main line, and then you unroll it in the opposite direction. Five times. There it is. Pull the tag and that will lock down beautifully, completely finishing it. Very smooth finish. You wait till you hear the sound of that rattling out through your guides when you hook a good fish. Almost won't be there. Trim the tag. Trim the little bits of frayed end of the braided monofilament. There we go. Beautiful smooth finish. Now, to make it even better, what I'll do is use some of this Rio UV knot finisher. Wonderful product. Just shorten that up a bit there. This is it here. Now this is a marvellous product for smoothing off and finishing knots, particularly knots that you're concerned are going to rattle through the guides. The catalyst to set this is ultraviolet light. So I can put this on this knot here, build it up into a smooth shape, and it's going to remain soft until I either take it out into the sunlight. Of course, the ultraviolet light from the sun will set it off, or use a small ultraviolet torch on it. Put the lid back on, which is what I have here. Just a little UV light, a little UV lamp. When I hit that with this UV beam, it's going to cure and go hard. Hit it from both sides. There we are. Lovely hard smooth finish. Now there's a couple of little lumps on there, a few little daggy tag ends, which I'm going to trim off, and I'll put another coating on there a little later. I'll also put a coating of this UV knot finisher on the area where the GSP braid tightens down onto the braided monofilament. This area here. I'll put a little coat on there. Like so. Seals it. Hit it with the UV torch, or take it out into the sunlight. There it is, set hard. Beautiful. There you are. Lovely smooth connection on the end of your backing. A good big size loop that you can pass the reel through. When you make your, when you change your fly lines, you want to be able to pass the reel through that loop. And there it is. Now it has happened that I've been out fishing and have hooked a big fish, say a GT or something, that's taken me into the reef, or a mackerel, and another mackerel's bitten the backing off, and that beautiful braided loop has disappeared along with the fly line. Now you're out fishing, you don't want to stop fishing, and you still need to create some sort of loop-to-loop connection in an emergency. And the way I'll do that, to put a loop on the front end of the backing very quickly, would be a triple turn surgeon's loop, like so. This will get me out of trouble, get me back fishing. Okay, pull that down tight. And then double that again with a double turn surgeon's loop, so that I end up with 4 strands of GSP backing for my loop-to-loop connection. That's a real quickie. Another way of doing it is to do a Bimini twist in the end of the GSP backing to form a loop. And you want to do around a 70 turn Bimini, and then double that again with a surgeon's loop. So both of those methods can get you out of trouble in a situation where you've lost the loop in the end of your backing, usually by being bitten off by a mackerel or taken into the reef by a big fish. But it will get you out of trouble. Now, the reason I don't use this sort of connection all the time, as I explained earlier, is that this braided loop does embed itself deeply into the loop on the back of the fly line, and it makes changing fly lines difficult. But also that triple turn surgeon's knot is not something that I would want to be fishing with consistently in GSP backing. Okay, I just wouldn't trust it to last me, you know, fish after fish, particularly big fish after big fish. But it will get you out of trouble. Making a loop with the surgeon's loop knots is a very effective method for putting a loop in the end of your backing for your trout fishing gear, because through a trout rod you simply cannot put enough pressure to break that system. The next connection we're going to run through is joining the fly line to the backing. There's several different ways of doing this. My preference is to use the loop-to-loop connection. I'm going to show you how to put a loop into the end of the GSP backing and how to connect that to the fly line. That, I believe, is the best method. GSP backing is so fine that if you knot it to the fly line, it will tend to cut in and pull off. And you know it's going to pull off when you get that big fish. So a loop-to-loop connection is by far the best system. To be completely secure, the loop-to-loop connection needs to sit in a particular way. Now, most of these Rio fly lines come with a welded loop already on the back of them. Wonderfully convenient for changing fly lines. And that is one of the major reasons why we use the loop-to-loop connection. It's security, but also it makes it very easy to change fly lines. Before we get on to making those loops, I want to show you how a loop-to-loop connection should sit, because there are two ways of doing it, the right way and the wrong way, and you don't want to do it the wrong way because it can cut itself. Now, this is purely to demonstrate how a loop-to-loop connection should and should not sit. I'm just going to loop a loop of monofilament onto this welded loop on the end of this Rio fly line. Now, this is an incorrect sitting down of a loop-to-loop connection. It's a hitch. You see that? Okay, if that pulls tight, it will cut this loop here. How you want a loop-to-loop connection to sit down is in a figure of 8, like so. You can see the difference. This connection is marvelously strong like that. So that's the right way, and this, in a hitch, is the wrong way. As I showed you earlier, most of the Rio fly lines come with this welded loop on the back and front end of them, and it's a wonderfully secure system. However, not all fly lines have this loop on them. When you buy something such as T14 or T8, which is a level fly line to be made into shooting heads and sink tips, there are no loops on those. A lot of other brands of fly lines don't put loops on their fly lines either. So what I'm going to show you now is how to put a braided loop on the end of fly lines for your loop-to-loop connection. And it's a fairly simple method, utilising once again this braided monofilament. I have it in two different forms here. This is 50 pound, it's going onto a fairly heavy fly line. This is the same, it's 50 pound, but I've actually just dyed this black. The reason for that is that I have noticed when I'm fishing in really clear oceanic water that a bright white loop on the front end of a fly line, sunk down deep, does spook some fish. It does put some fish off. So I've simply dyed this bit of 50 pound braided monofilament black. Just done it in a microwave oven with Dylon, normal Dylon dye, a teaspoon of salt as a fixative. I just whacked it in the microwave oven for a couple of minutes and it comes out that colour. Perfect. However, I'm going to work now with the white, standard white 50 pound braided monofilament. make a braided loop, once again using the tapestry needle, feeding the end through. That's it, pulling the tag end down into the inside, just the same as I made a loop to go on the end of the backing. More or less the same length here, 15 centimetres or roughly 6 inches. Trim the tag off, pull that tag back inside itself, like so. That's it, so you've got a smooth connection. More or less the same on the other end. 6 inches or 15 centimetres. Then take your fly line, the end of your fly line, you can put these on the back or the front end. However, I do put them on the back end of all my fly lines and just poke the fly line up inside the braid, just working it with the inch method, inch worm. I'm bunching it up and then sliding it on. Keep it going, take that end all the way up inside. And when you meet the tag that's coming down the other end, the tag that's been used to form the loop, try and get this braid opened up here and get the fly line up inside it, on the inside. So once again, it's doubled over on the inside. You can see that pretty clearly there, how the fly line has gone right up inside. Now what I'll do here is use some of this Loctite 406 super glue, wonderful industrial strength super glue this one, and just put a drop where it overlaps, right there. So this is soaking in to the braid all the way through to the fly line. That's all you need, just that much there. Let that dry. Dries fairly quickly, spread it out with your finger. Make sure you don't leave it on there for too long. This is very, very adhesive stuff. Now on the other end, I will take a fly tying bobbin and some flat waxed fly tying thread because I want to seize down this frayed end here. It's called a seizing in knot tying terminology. And using this fly tying bobbin, I'll just spin it round and round, binding over that frayed end. Just working my way down to where it meets the fly line. You can see there I've gone right off the end, then it worked back up. Now you'll note here that I've left a fairly long tag in this fly tying thread. Cut that off, form it into a loop like so, then spin your fly tying thread over it. And we're going to use that loop of thread as a pull through, just as you would finish a rod binding, for example. Cut the tag off here, poke it through that loop of thread, and then pull it back in under itself like so. There it is. wonderfully secure and has protected the frayed end of the braid. Now I'll just coat that with some of the UV knot sealer. Just form a nice little football, neat shaped football on it. Take it up onto the fly line a little. Let it soak in. Let it soak in. Of course you can take this out the sunshine to set it, but in this case here I'm just going to use the UV torch, like so. Give it plenty, zap it with plenty of UV beams. There we go. That's dry. Beautiful smooth connection. And very, very strong. You simply will not pull that apart. What happens is that the harder I pull here, this braid actually tightens down onto the fly line and grips it, and it simply won't come off. But you can see that I have secured the end of the braid that's come in here and formed the loop. I've secured that in there with a bit of super glue. You could also use that UV cement, but I like the super glue because it penetrates right in. That simply will not come apart. There are almost as many different methods for joining the leader to the front end of the fly line as there are fishermen in the world. Some fishermen like to use a whipped loop on the front end of the fly line. And before I go any further, I'll just tell you what these markings are. This is to indicate that this is an 8-weight line. The big bar there is a 5, and the little ones here are 1 each, 5, 6, 7, 8. I mark all my fly lines like this so that I can keep track of what actual weight they are. However, there are many, many different methods for joining your leader to the front end of the fly line. Some fly fishermen like to whip a loop into it, like so. Using a fly tying bobbin, that method I've shown you for finishing off the braided loops, just whipping a loop in there. Using 2 little nail knots, coating the thing in UV knot sealer after the nail knots. You can nail knot on a butt section here of monofilament. You can put a braided loop on there. You can also buy the Rio lines that have a factory finish loop already in the front end of them. So there's a lot of different ways. The braided loop you've already seen. That's the one I put on the back end of the fly line. I use braided loops on the front end of fly lines that are 10, 11 weight and above. So things that are really going to cop a lot of pulling, a lot of pressure on them. 9 weights and below, I will use a monofilament butt section here. I join that to the fly line with a nail knot, and that's the knot I'm going to show you how to tie right now. I like to use a needle for my nail knots, and I'll show you why later. You've got the needle, eye of the needle pointing towards the end of the fly line. Lay your monofilament butt section parallel to the fly line and put a right angle bend in it in the tag end here. Wrap that tag around the fly line, the butt section and the needle. Wrap that tag 7 times around the 3. The fly line, the needle and the butt section. Now on lighter gear, say for trout rods, you might only do 5 wraps. Certainly don't do any more than 7 wraps, in my experience. Beyond 7 wraps, this knot becomes difficult to pull up tight. Take the tag end through the eye of the needle. Now you'll notice that I have all of those wraps pinched under my thumb and forefinger. I'm holding them all in place, and I'm holding them quite tight. You'll see my thumb's starting to turn white there. Keeping very good pressure on them to stop them from unraveling. Therefore, I need to take a pair of pliers to pull that tag end back through under those wraps, just sliding it in under my fingers. Now the reason I do it like that is that when I take my fingers off, that knot will be almost complete. See that? It's not going to spread out all up and down the fly line and then have to be gradually worked tight with my fingers. It's there, it's almost complete. Now, when you're pulling up a nail knot, such as this, it is essential that you get all those wraps even before you pull it up tight. You can see how even that is now, our 7 wraps. And then it is essential that you only pull the monofilament to tighten it. Forget the fly line. What we have here is a binding, and by pulling the standing part and the tag end, we're pulling that binding down tight onto the fly line. So we're not knotting with the fly line, we're pulling down tight onto the fly line. Take a pair of pliers onto the tag end, take a wrap on the standing part, and pull that down tight. You can see how it collapses down onto the fly line and digs right in. Now that will not come off, that will take an awful lot of strain. Trim the tag end off nice and close, like so. Beautiful smooth connection that's not going to get stuck in the guides. Wonderful. That's the needle version of the nail knot, using needle as the main tool. Now if you're out fishing and something happens to that nail knot, it comes adrift for some reason, might get bitten off by a small mackerel or something, or it will wear away with time, you'll get fatigue at this point here. Cut it off, and don't worry if you don't have a needle, because what you can do is use, for example, a little length of monofilament, like so. Just put a kink in it, and use that as your pull through. Okay, see this here? Use that as your pull through, or a length of wire, like so. Just use that as your pull through instead of a needle. In fact, at home on my rigging bench now, I generally tend to use just a length of monofilament to pull that tag back under instead of the needle. Before we go on with this knot section, I'd like to show you a couple of things about knots. One of the most important things about knots in monofilament line is that they are pulled up fully tight. What happens when a knot isn't pulled up fully tight and isn't pulled up correctly is you get slippage, and then you get a break in the line, or the knot. Usually breaks at the knot. Let me show you something here. I've just put a loop in the end of that line. I'm going to take some pressure on it here, pull that tight, and with a piece of ordinary tissue paper, break that line just by rubbing it back and forth. It's melted. See the end of that? It's melted just with a piece of tissue paper. And that's what happens to knots that aren't pulled up fully tight. They slip under pressure and bang, they break. How I'm going to show you to tie the surgeon's knot, one of the most important parts of it is to get the overlapping strands even, fully even. And this is what makes it a strong knot. This is what makes any knot a strong knot. So, this is the surgeon's loop knot. This is a very useful knot for forming loops in strong line. It's not a 100% knot. I think it breaks at around 70% of the strength of the line. So this is not something you go tying in the terminal tippet end. You use it in heavier line for forming loop-to-loop connections in your butt section. Now you remember earlier I showed you how to put a braided loop on heavier lines. Now, if you needed to put a butt section on that, a butt section is that heavy section of mono that separates the fly line from the leader. The butt section is actually part of the leader. Or if you need to put a loop in the front end of the butt section that you've nail knotted to your fly line here, if you want to put a loop in the front end here, the best knot, or the knot that I prefer to use, is simply a surgeon's loop knot. It's basically just a double overhand loop knot. Once, twice, there it is, all pulling up even. Okay. Then, very important in this knot that you get all the strands even before you pull it up tight. Very important. What you don't want is one strand sticking out. Get it all even. Put it over your loop. Take the tag and pull it up tight. There it is there, pulled up tight. We have a loop knot. Cut the tag off. There we have our loop knot. There it is. We're ready to loop on the leader. On the front end of the fly line with a braided loop on it, what I would do, simply do for the butt section, surgeon's loop, one end, pulling it tight on the cup hook there, trim the tag. Let's say I want a butt section 1 metre long. Then using the loop-to-loop connection method I showed you before, I would loop on the butt section to the braided loop, mono to the braided loop, like so. Surgeon's loop in the other end, or you could then tie on your leader. But I'm going to put a surgeon's loop in here because I love loop-to-loop connections. These are the snap swivels of the fly fishing world. Another surgeon's loop there. You can see there I've used the surgeon's loop knot 3 times already. It's a very important knot. The Bimini twist is one of the most important knots that a saltwater fly fisherman should know. It's used to form the finer end of the loop-to-loop connection. We're getting down to 20-pound breaking strain or 10 kilo and lighter tippet sections. And we want to loop this onto either the loop in the end of the fly line or the loop in the end of the butt section. A Bimini twist is 100% strong if you do it properly. It's not a difficult knot, there's just a couple of principles you need to understand. Now, always leave yourself plenty of tag end to work with on a Bimini. Form a loop here. I have here around 3 feet of line, 1 metre of line. Form a loop in the end here. Start spinning 20 times. $21 for luck. This used to be known as the 20-turn knot. Now, put that loop over both your knees. Take the tag end up here. Now you can see how all of that's come tight. The first part of getting this right is to understand that you then take the tag back down through the 90 degrees so that you can feed it onto the twists. That's the first step. The second step is to simply push your knees apart and feed the tag on, and it just rolls down. Very simple. Then a half hitch to lock it. Just 1 half hitch around one strand. Now it won't come undone. Take the loop, put it over your big toe, and then you just finish it with a risotto finish. Lay the tag back up along itself, then unwrap it. Pull it tight. Look at that. Beautiful, neat finish. Tight Bimini. Okay? Now, to form a loop-to-loop connection, what we'll do is take that double, this is what we call the double, and double it again with a surgeon's loop. once, twice. Pull it tight, and there is our loop, our 4-strand loop for the loop-to-loop connection to the butt or the fly line. Now I'm tying this in fly line so it's clearer for you to see. Okay, you should have been able to see that pretty clearly. There's our surgeon's loop. Pull that down fully tight. There's our 4-strand loop for the loop-to-loop connection. Now you'll notice when I demonstrated that Bimini twist that we ended up with 4 strands of line at the end, and there's a fair bit of bulk in that entire system. This knot is a Bimini twist with a twist. It's what has become known as the guide's Bimini, and it forms a very, very small, neat loop. So you don't have to double the loop to get the loop-to-loop connection, just a single, neat loop. To do this, start with a fairly short tag, like so. Fairly short tag end, and we want to do 20 turns again. $21 for luck. Wet the Bimini down, just to reduce the friction. Take the tag between your teeth. And pull, I'm going to pull the twists down onto my hands. See how my 3 fingers are there and my thumb? The thumb is going to do what the knees did in the other Bimini. Watch this. Pull it right down onto the 3 fingers and the thumb. Change the angle, push apart. This stage you have to get a pinch where the 2 legs meet. Get a half hitch, around 1 strand. As I showed you before, that's now locked. With that single half hitch, the Bimini is locked. Then we just do the risotto finish. Now how I do it when I'm in the boat is like so. Just take the double there, risotto 1, 2, 3, 4 times in this case. Unroll it 1, 2, 3 times. I just hook the loop over my eye tooth and snug it down. Finish it off, put your finger through there and pull it down. This is simply to form a far less bulky loop-to-loop connection. So what we had before with the double surgeon's loop to make a 4-strand loop, instead there is my very neat, simple little connection. Beautiful. This next knot I'm going to show you is a variation of the surgeon's loop, but it's called a surgeon's knot, and it's used to connect lengths of monofilament, but in particular to connect fluorocarbon tippets to monofilament. It's a knot I've used for the last couple of years. I have put it through some very, very rigorous testing, and it's always come through with flying colours. This is an astonishingly strong knot, but also an astonishingly simple knot for joining monofilament to fluorocarbon, monofilament to monofilament, fluorocarbon to fluorocarbon, and also these lines in different diameters. It's a very, very simple knot, and this is how I do it. Because one of these strands needs to pass through the knot, you need to separate your tippet, for example, here from this length here. If this spool is your reel or your leader length, and this is the tippet length. This needs to be separated. Lay the 2 parallel to each other, like so. Now, remember I explained in the surgeon's loop knot the importance of the strands all staying together? It is also very important in this knot. And what I do is wet it. What that does is sticks them together. You see when I form this loop, they don't come apart. Now the surgeon's knot is simply an overhand knot passed through 3 times. Once, twice, 3 times. And this is why I had to cut this tippet end off, because I'm passing it right through that knot. And then you slowly pull it up tight, making sure all of those strands stay together. Now this is a difficult knot to pull up tight because there are so many strands. You need to get these 4 strands together and pull them together. Now at this point, if you see any wayward strands in there, get your pliers and pull the corresponding section that tightens that might tighten any wayward strands down. Not too tight. That's sitting beautifully now. There it is. This is a phenomenally strong knot. To clip the tag ends, just bend the main part of the line over your thumb like so. The tag ends will stand up. Just cut them off. Beautiful knot. Incredibly strong. Astonishingly strong knot. Well, it's been a fair old process coming from the real Arbour through all the connections, and now finally we've got down to the business end, tying the fly on and going fishing. Now, for saltwater fly fishing, I like to use a loop knot to tie on big flies such as this. Freshwater fishing, I'll use a different knot, which I'll demonstrate to you in a minute. But first of all, I'll show you Lefty's loop knot. Now, in all knot tying science, one of the golden rules is to never use an overhand knot, an ordinary granny's knot. But in this knot we do. Tie an overhand knot in the end of the tippet. Take it down through the eye of the hook. Now, you'll see in this knot that the standing part of the line comes into the overhand knot from this angle. Now an overhand knot is not something that you would normally tie in line because it reduces its strength by up to 50%. However, we're going to fix that with this knot. So I've tied an overhand knot. You can see the main part of the line enters the knot from there. Take the tag through the overhand knot so that the tag exits the overhand knot the same way as the main part of the line comes in. Wrap the tag 3 times around the standing part, then take it back through that overhand knot in the same direction. Now in this particular knot you do need to use your teeth. Just take a grip on the tag, just a grip, not a strong pull. Pull it up tight. That's all there is to it. Just to hold the tag in place. It's a beautiful knot and lets the fly swing on a very effective loop. Lefty's loop knot. And look how the tag ends up pointing backwards. Means it's less likely to pick up bits of weed and spookfish. Cut that tag off. There it is. Lefty's loop knot. This last knot I'm going to show you is what I use for tying flies onto fine tippets, in particular fluorocarbon. This has proven to be a particularly strong knot with fluorocarbon tippets. It's a knot called a 16-20 knot. Take it through the eye of the hook. Now understand that for purposes of demonstration here, I'm using, what have I got, 8-pound tippet and a pretty large fly, so that you can see what I'm doing. This is a knot that I particularly like using in very, very fine tippets. Pass it through, form a loop in the tag, take that loop around the standing part 4 times, then the tag back through the loop. That's how it looks. Pull it up tight and slide it down. Now you'll hear this knot called a few different names. It's become a favoured knot amongst many fly fishermen I know. simply because it is so reliable. It's very, very close to 100% strong. Known traditionally as a 16-20 knot. Don't ask me why. Well, there you go. That's the system I've developed over the last couple of years, and believe me, it stood me in good stead on some torrid battles with some great fish. What too many fly fishermen do is try and make this system too complex. I've tried to simplify it, yet at the same time retain 100% breaking strength in the entire system from the reel through to the fly. I hope you've learnt enough from this to go away and be able to fish with complete confidence. Put pressure on big fish and land them. Good fishing. This is easily the biggest cobia I've ever hooked. Situations like this, where you just have to have absolute confidence in your knot. Put a lot of pressure on it. There's a little bit of reef structure around here. I don't want it to get to the bottom, so I'm fishing fairly hard here with an 11 weight. Fair bit of pressure on the fish. So when you want all your knots and rigs to hold together, the last thing you want to do is lose a fish like this. It's a good sized cobia. Yeah. This is where I try and dictate things a little. I want him to get his head back down. Hang on. Well done. Oh, what a shot. What a shot with the gaff. What an incredible fish. What a surprise out of that school of fish. Yeah. See it just swimming around there on the surface. Right in the middle. Right in the middle. Yep. You know, you'd think it'd be eating finny scab, but in fact it was gulping down those little baits. All those little white bait. Well, that's it. The knots I've shown you how to tie have just been put into action. Lefty's loop knot, connecting the fly. Triple turn surgeon's knot, using this Rio IGFA 10 kilo material, joining it to the shock tippet. At this end, the guide's Bimini that I showed you with the little mini loop and the short Bimini, and then the braided loop put on the front end of the fly line with a whipping here. And this also is braid that I've dyed black. So that's it. The system works.